One of the world's biggest myths, the city of Atlantis. Is it true, or is it only a myth? Our task, to research and decide together. The origin of the myth. The story of Atlantis goes all the way back to the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. Plato was one of Socrates' best students, and he wrote many important texts on political philosophy, including The Republic, which was a vastly influential work on utopian, moral political philosophy. Plato went on to influence the next generation of ancient Greek philosophers, and included Aristotle amongst his very own students. And it is one of Plato's writings that has given us the myth of the lost city of Atlantis. In about 359 BC, Plato returned from visiting the city of Syracuse in Sicily, where he had been trying to influence the formation of a new type of government there. And it would be around this time that he had written Timaeus. This was one of his collections of dialogues in which he used characters to discuss the philosophical ideas that he was exploring. In this text, he used the allegorical tale of a place that he called Atlantis to illustrate how bad management and immoral politics could ultimately destroy a civilization. The story of Atlantis is a type of lyrical writing in which the imaginary city of Atlantis is painted as a utopian society that he had said existed over 9,000 years before, which is almost 12,000 years ago. And despite having great power and being ruled over by the god of the sea Poseidon, it became corrupted by its wealth and possessions, slowly decaying into its own decadence and hubris. The legend then goes that Poseidon was angry with the degeneracy of the Atlanteans, and he took his revenge, using his power to create an almost seismic event that triggered a massive wave that in turn engulfed the island of Atlantis. Plato's cautionary tale says, "In a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis, in like manner, disappeared in the depths of the sea." Before Plato wrote of this mythical place, there was no previous record of its existence. After Plato's writings, the notion of Atlantis captured the imaginations of many people and began to appear in writings. But even Aristotle, a great philosopher in his own right and student of Plato himself, said that Atlantis was invented as a story by Plato in order to teach political philosophy. Classical scholars agree that Atlantis is fictitious and is one of many myths, legends, and stories that were told for allegorical purposes. Search and exploration. Even though it was mostly understood to be fictitious within its own time, the story caught the imaginations of people who really wanted it to be real. And as time passed, the allegory and purpose of the story seems to have been abandoned in favor of searching for the lost place. In 1882, a pseudoscientist by the name of Ignatius Donnelly published a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, in which he had attempted to prove that Atlantis was in fact a real place, and that all of the civilizations that followed were actually descended from it. He claimed that things like the pyramids of ancient Egypt could not have possibly been built by the Egyptians themselves, and therefore the highly advanced people of Atlantis were the ones who had created the technological feats of all the ancient world. He claimed that he had conducted a scientific study, although his book was little more than a fantasy story in which he put forward a lot of wild and discriminatory theories. People have taken his writings to be considerably more significant than they really were, and this one book sparked the entire modern search for and belief in the myth of Atlantis. But it is important to remember that just because someone calls something scientific, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a rigorous and studious example of scientific research and value. Despite the dubious origins of many of Donnelly's theories, his book has a huge impact on the myth and continuing fascination with the so-called lost city of Atlantis. When he wrote this book, the interest in the exploration of the ancient world was beginning to gather steam. The idea of there being great lost treasures and adventures in mysterious far-flung places was hugely appealing, and archaeology was beginning to be a trendy pursuit amongst the wealthy class. The search for a city full of gold and silver was just too tantalizing of an idea to ignore. Even Jacques Cousteau, the highly respected and well-loved French explorer of the ocean, and his team went on a quest to understand the myth of Atlantis. Cousteau never believed that Plato's story was true, but he understood that it could have been based on some real events that happened in the region. Location theories. In Plato's story, he described Atlantis as an island built in concentric circles, consisting of 3 rings of land and 3 rings of water, with 2 great temples of silver and gold at the center, surrounded by the sea. He placed it at the Pillars of Hercules. This is the name for the modern-day Strait of Gibraltar, where the Mediterranean Sea meets the Atlantic Ocean. This area has given people the opportunity to theorize about several different possible locations for the lost city. The notion that it is fictitious does not seem to be an impediment to the search for Atlantis. One such location theory has placed Atlantis on the Azores archipelago. This is a bunch of islands that's located in the Atlantic to the west of the Strait of Gibraltar. It's part of present-day Portugal. As well as this posited location, there are others who passionately believe that Atlantis is to be found in Morocco. There have even been enthusiasts so determined to discover the whereabouts of this pretend place that they've invented a computer program to track it down. This probability map uses information that's gathered from Plato's writings to determine that, with an apparent 99.9% probability, a place that has no historical basis is located in the part of Morocco called Souss Massa Plain. Here, they say, there are the right sort of rocks, evidence of seismic activity, and some evidence that although is now a desert, this region was a fertile and green valley many thousands of years ago. Unfortunately, it was still not an island, which throws a proverbial spanner in the works. The next theory seems to hold more water. Quite literally, it is the real lost city of Helike. This was a powerful city in ancient Greece. It controlled shipping and was based on the cult of Poseidon that had a statue of the god himself at the center of the city. He was also stamped onto the coins that they used. But Helike was built on fault lines, and in 373 BC an earthquake would cause a tsunami that engulfed the entire city. The whole city would be lost and nobody survived. At the time, the event was well known, and although it was underwater, the city was still visible from the now further inland shoreline. It even became a tourism destination, and people would visit the site. It was well documented for several hundred years. Then there is another theory, this one slightly more out there. It heads deep into the desert. The Reshat structure in the wild and impossibly dangerous disputed area of Mauritania is another possible location for the city of Atlantis. In 1978, Jacques Cousteau and his team investigated the different possible locations for the mythical civilization and ended up focusing their attention on the Aegean Sea near Greece. This area is prone to seismic activity, and about 3,600 years ago, a huge volcanic eruption destroyed the island of Santorini. This had been inhabited by the Minoan civilization, an advanced society that disappeared at around the same time as the volcano's eruption. And finally, and by no means the last of the multiple theories out there is the suggestion that Atlantis must be located close to the Strait of Gibraltar, Plato's Pillars of Hercules, in modern-day southern Spain. The location that has some archaeologists excited about this area is the marshland and mudflats of the Donanya National Park. Archaeological Discoveries. In each of these postulated places, there are differing amounts of stuff that can be considered archaeological evidence. Whether any of it could really be considered evidence for the presence of the mythical civilization of Atlantis, well, that's debatable and highly questionable. But the people who want to believe this story also really want to find the evidence that proves their own theories. Cultural impact. The myth of Atlantis has inspired endless tales of treasure hunting and stories of lost worlds. It's a favorite theme amongst Hollywood, as well as in storybooks all throughout the ages. People are naturally drawn to the idea that there may be a hidden world, stuffed full of treasure, just waiting to be rediscovered. In the 20th century, dozens upon dozens more books would be published, many of them fiction, but some which purported to be scientific in their approach about the secrets of Atlantis. It's also been an obsession of comic books, manga, and anime. The myth of lost worlds lends itself especially well to the visual style of these genres. And since 1936, there have been films made that were based in Atlantis or on the theme of searching for the place. Television has been obsessed with Plato's tale and explored everything from fictional representations through to reality shows in which people seek out the real Atlantis. It is a regular feature in documentaries where the location and evidence change, but the passion to be the one who finds it never diminishes. Atlantis has held humanity in the grips of its impossible fantasy since ancient times. The quest for a place that was perfect, for a civilization that was once the best of humanity, has remained at the core of our fascination with Atlantis. But Plato's cautionary tale of morality and societal decline seems to have been somewhat disregarded along the way. As we seek treasures and the untold wealth of a place that was full of gold, we've forgotten the very same love of and pursuit of that wealth was what doomed the fabled Atlantis in the first place. It may have once been a lesson in morality, not a factual account, but ironically, humanity seems to have missed that point entirely. Most historians agree that Atlantis was not a real place, but that Plato may have borrowed elements from other different real places and stories to create an allegory to explain his political philosophy. That it has endured in our psyches for so long is a desire to believe, to hope that something magical exists, even in the face of evidence that says otherwise. Jacques Cousteau put it best when he wrote, "Every explorer I have met has been driven, not coincidentally but quintessentially, by curiosity, a single-minded, insatiable, and even jubilant need to know." Let me know in the comments what you think about Atlantis. Do you believe it's real, or is it just a myth? This was Civilize. Subscribe, because the next video is an even bigger myth that we have to solve together.